All right, giant builders. So our next guest is a Christian sexpert. So don't turn it off. I was feeling a little awkward for this, but this is really good. There is more intimacy than just sex. So let's find out.
Building spirituality, family, health, and business. This is The Giant Builders with Lois Wyant.
Hey, giant builders. I know you're going to really love this next guest. I think she has some amazing ideas. And so it made me think about some of my past guests that I think you'll be interested as far as in this relationship of marriage. So I'm going to put those links below, and I hope you'll visit those as well. Hi, giant builders. Welcome. I am so excited that you're here today because this particular guest is going to be really interesting for you. So this is Angela, the Christian sexpert. So hi, Angela. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I'm fine. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. I'm Angela, the Christian sexpert. I talk all about sex and intimacy, primarily in Christian marriage, but you don't have to be a Christian to follow me because I get a lot of what they would call themselves evangelicals or non-Christians following me because they tell me that this is the sex ed that they should have had when they were in school. So don't let my Christian worldview throw you off because I totally respect that not everybody shares my faith background, but I believe that um, society, as well as the evangelical church, has caused harm to marriages and relationships. And I think that there's better options for us. And so I really love seeing relationships and marriages helped and changed based on the things that I teach.
Wonderful. All right. So I'll be honest with you. I was a little bit feeling like awkward when your topic came up. But then I felt, this is really important because honestly, probably the most arguments between my husband and I had to do with intimacy. So tell us, where do you want to start?
That is such a common thing, both the feeling of awkwardness when people find out what I do. I get a lot of, especially in person, I get a lot of like quick subject changes when people say, "Oh, what do you do?" "Oh, I'm a sex and intimacy coach." "Oh, so tell me about your son." Or, things like that. Because as a society, and especially women in particular, we are not one of the things I talk a lot about is women are not allowed to express their sexuality in the same way that men are. And that is true whether you're in the evangelical church or in just regular secular society. There's this idea that men need and want sex more than women do, and women just don't enjoy it. And that is simply not the case. Healthy women in safe marriages don't turn down good sex for no reason. And we are simply not socially allowed to express our sexuality as freely as men do because we're condemned for it, while also supposed to be this sex goddess fulfilling his every woman desire behind closed doors. But don't you dare speak about that in public. And so a lot of people are intimidated by me and intimidated by my work. And I get it, but it makes me sad because like we should be enjoying sex with our spouses. There shouldn't be conflict around sexual intimacy. If someone's uninterested, rather than fighting about it, if your spouse isn't interested, isn't going to make them more interested at all. It's going to drive them farther away. And so we're not taught to get curious and ask questions. And so there's a lot that goes into it, from society pressures and our own personal what if I'm too much? What if I want something and they reject me because of what I want? Or they're not doing enough to meet me, and there it's so much. It's a lot.
That's a lot. So, all right, let's get started then. So, all right, how would someone bring up something like if they wanted to be more experimental in the bedroom?
So there's a few options. One of the things that I kind of say as a joke is send them my social media stuff, because I talk about stuff on socials. Like I talk about experimenting. I give ideas. I have a whole series on my TikTok that's titled Bedroom Games. And I reference my TikTok because like I have those all in a playlist, but I post them on all of my socials. And so you can I find that one of the new tools that couples can use for communication is sending each other social media posts and discussing it. It's a valuable tool that couples should not be ignoring in their marriages, because that opens up a line of communication. You can simply send them a reel and say, hey, what do you think about this? And that opens that line of communication. Something else that I work on a lot with my coaching couples is called a sex journal. And I find a lot of couples struggle with verbal communication because they are afraid of seeing a look of rejection on their spouse's face for, like, hey, I'm really interested in trying this activity. And their spouse getting this look like, ew, why would you want to do that? And they're afraid of that. So we struggle with verbal communication. And so a sex journal kind of eliminates that fear, because what you're going to do is you're going to get a pretty journal that makes your heart sparkle, and you're going to write down the last time that we had sex, I really loved. I didn't so much love, and the next time we have sex, I would like to try. And then you're going to give your spouse the opportunity to read it. You're not going to make it weird and stare into their soul while they're reading it. That's I've had couples where he's like, she was just staring at me. I'm just like, we're not going to do that. Don't make it weird, because giving them the space to read it in private gives them the opportunity to get their face under control if they do have a knee-jerk reaction to something you said. But then it gives them the opportunity to get curious. Oh, I had no idea that you didn't really like this activity. What about it do you not enjoy? Oh, I didn't know that you were interested in this. What about it is appealing to you? And that really opens up the lines of communication, allows you time and space to manage your own reactions and get curious and ask questions. Because remember, if the person that you're married to really deeply loves you, they want real intimacy with you. And that real intimacy is a deep vulnerability and a deep knowing of the other person. So they should not be immediately looking to judge you, but rather they should be looking for greater understanding of what you are coming to them with. And so if they meet you with immediate judgment and condemnation, that's a bigger issue in the marriage overall. But we also need to learn to get curious about our spouses, because that's not a skill that's often taught in our homes, to get curious, right? In our homes, it's often, well, I'm the parent and I say so, and there's no room for curiosity or questions. And so when you get married, that pattern just kind of follows you. And so you really have to learn to get curious about the things that your partner is communicating to you.
So this also sounds like a good process to use, like if you're shy about talking about sex.
Yes, absolutely. If you are shy about it, if it makes you personally uncomfortable, this is a fantastic tool for so many couples. And this is the process I just described is what I use for my beginning coaching clients that are just starting out on the journey of getting to know their own sexuality, their own, getting comfortable with the idea of I should enjoy sex, things like that. But then as you progress, it starts to become this rich way to look back on your marriage and see how far you've come in your sexual intimacy. But also you can really start to develop your fantasies and your desires and start to really figure out how to play with those within your marriage as well. So it's a tool that will grow with you as you grow in your marriage.
Okay, well, there's some awkward stages in life as far as like menopause and different things of that nature. Like, what do we do with different when our bodies start changing and all those types of things?
I I laugh because I feel that in my soul. Perimenopause might be the end of me with the hot flashes. Um, it's when you are with so when you've been with someone for forever, right? I've been married for over 21 years. Next year I will have been married for longer than I was ever single. And I am not the same person that my husband married 21 years ago. My body has changed at the skin level, because like we shed our skin every 7 years, like our skin, it's totally renewed. So not only that, but like we've grown and matured. The things that I enjoyed early in our marriage, my body isn't capable of doing anymore because I'm old and I have physical disabilities now. Um, but also like emotionally, there's just things that I'm just not as interested in anymore. They offered us something early in our marriage, but that something that we
That we
got
got.
from it just isn't the same after 21 years. And so people forget that just because we grow and change, that's not like a threat to the marriage. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to be like this for the rest of your lives. We tend to forget that humans go through seasons in every phase of our life, and our sex life is no exception. And so we have these mountaintop seasons and we have valley seasons. And just because you're like in a valley season and you feel like menopause is this valley season that's never going to end, that's not true, because you will learn to change and adapt. And so, what I strongly recommend is that when couples are in a new phase and they realize, oh, like perimenopause, women in particular who are experiencing perimenopause, one of the big problems is going to be thinning of the tissues in your genitals. And so you're going to be more prone to micro tears and infections, more pain during sex. And so figuring out how to adjust to that is particularly important. But with every season, the first thing that you should be doing is having a conversation with your spouse. What is the role of sex in our relationship in this season of life? How do we define sex in this season of life? And what adjustments do we need to make to accommodate where we're at? Right? So many of my couples, before they see me, define sex as it has to have penetrative activities. And I'm like, no, no, babe. Sex is so much more than penetration. There is so much more that you can do. And for a woman in menopause in particular, penetrative sex can be very painful. And so you may need to redefine what sex actually is like on a baseline to enjoy sex in that season, because it is so much more than just a penetrative activity. There's so many other things that you can be doing and still being sexually fulfilled. And that is such an important thing, no matter, because like in postpartum seasons, penetrative sex needs to be completely off the table while she's postpartum. So what does intimacy, because sex is only 1/12 of the full picture of intimacy. There's 12 types of intimacy we can experience in marriage. Sex is only one of them. And so like in postpartum, it's okay to completely back off of sexual intimacy 100% and say, you know what, this is off the table for a season. But we still have 11 other intimacies that we can focus on.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. I didn't know there were like 11 options there. All right,
Yes.
so can you just share one or two more?
Of the different intimacies.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll run through the list. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory, but I'll explain how they kind of interplay with each other. So we've got aesthetic, which is moments of beauty together. Those are kind of like your Instagram moments, like, oh, look at us watching the sunset. We've got commitment, communication, obvious. Conflict is a form of intimacy that really intimidates a lot of couples. Creative, which is all about like being creative together, like choosing how to decorate your living room is a creative intimacy. Crisis is a form of intimacy. How do you function together in a crisis? Emotional intimacy, obviously. Intellectual, recreational, how do you have fun together? Sexual, spiritual, and work. Work intimacy, again, don't make it weird. Don't try and go to work with your spouse if their job does not, like that's not a thing. I occasionally get to go to work with my husband because he drives a truck. And so if he's going to be driving somewhere near one of my friends, I will hitch a ride, ditch him for a few hours, go see my friends, and hop back in the truck with him. But work is achieving your common goals. So doing something like cooking a meal together or working in the garden together could be a form of work intimacy. And even with that gardening example, you can see that recreational and work intimacy can be kind of in the same thing sometimes, because working in the garden is work, but for a lot of people, that's also their hobby. It's a form of recreational intimacy. My grandfather had over 150 rose bushes in his backyard. And so that was very much a recreational intimacy. So, to explain how a lot of these interplay and work together, I am often asked, like, she's just not in the mood as often as I am, and she's saying, well, I feel disconnected. I need to connect before I can be in the mood, which is the difference between spontaneous desire and responsive desire. That's a whole other thing that we can talk about or not. I could talk about this stuff all day. But what I normally say is, okay, recreational intimacy is all about how you have fun together. My favorite example of this is my husband and I really enjoy board games. We love playing board games together. And so I don't know how board games work in your house, but in my house, we have a very sort of play fight dynamic in our marriage. So recreational intimacy via board games in my house is also going to involve conflict and communication intimacies, because we're going to fight and I'm going to let him know how big of a loser he is. And then I'm going to, after I beat him soundly, going to have to use communication and emotional intimacies to make him feel better about his own life because he's a big, big loser. And then at the end of the evening, we're feeling more connected. I'm more ready to hop into bed with him because we have now touched on recreational commitment and communication intimacies. And depending on the type of board game that you're playing, it could also involve intellectual intimacy as well, because intellectual intimacy is all about like how the other person thinks, why they think the way they do, learning things together. So it may even be touching on intellectual intimacy as well. So they all are intertwined, they all build on each other. And it's really important that you have a balanced view of each of them in your marriage, and you're not relying on one of them to create and sustain all of the intimacy in your marriage.
I love how you use the word intimacy in all the different areas that you're building your relationship, because I can see all of those things, and to me it was like, oh well, that's your relationship building. But I like how you interact the word intimacy into it, because as a married couple, there's a lot of different ways there that you're building that relationship.
And yes, and one of the things that I see far too often is couples trying to rely on sex to create and maintain intimacy in their marriage. And they're neglecting all of these other things. And the bottom line is, sex doesn't last forever. If you truly plan on being married for 50 years, there's going to be seasons in your life where sex is simply not a possibility. I talked about in the postpartum season, a woman should be free from any sexual pressure when she's just shoved a watermelon out of her vagina. Like that tears, men don't understand how much that tears up a woman's body until they witness it firsthand. And sometimes men still witness it firsthand and they don't respect it. And so, if you have up until that point relied on sexual intimacy to create and maintain the intimacy in the marriage, and it's suddenly ripped out from under you, what are you left with? Not only are you trying to learn how to change your family dynamic, learn how to keep a tiny helpless human alive, but now you have to figure out how to keep your marriage alive. Versus if you have already established firm systems for the other 11 intimacies, you can just rely on those systems that you've established to keep the marriage healthy while you are running on 45 minutes of sleep and a whole pot of coffee and having something scream at you for 20 hours a day.
That's true. There is like you said, just the exhaustion and just especially if it's a first time mom, you don't even know for sure what you're doing to keep this little person alive. I mean, that in itself is a lot of pressure, but then learning the whole process and learning how to parent together. And yeah, that's a whole different dynamics.
Yes, and you simply cannot rely on sex during that season. And so what are you going to do to keep the marriage strong and healthy?
So that kind of brings up another idea as far as like some couples that I know, they kind of look more like roommates than they do married couples. And I think that as you're stating these different intimacies, that not relying on just the sexual intimacy can kind of revamp that relationship.
Yes, absolutely. So I actually have a course available on my website called Finding Your Fire, and it's all about moving out of the roommate stage of marriage. And so part of it is walking through and creating systems for each of the other, 11 intimacies. But part of it is also figuring out how to reignite your sexual intimacy in your marriage. Because as we've talked about, we do go through seasons, and sometimes our sex life winds up in a valley season for no other reason than it just does, right? It's not like postpartum, it's not perimenopause, it's not menopause, there's no injuries, there's nothing. It's just life is busy and it happens, and having sex feels like too much physical and emotional labor sometimes on both ends. And so it just feels easier to lay in bed, scroll TikTok, roll over, give each other a kiss, and go to sleep in some seasons. Every marriage goes through that. You guys are not on the verge of divorce if that happens. Like, you don't have to panic. It's a complete, every couple faces that at some point in their marriage. And so the course I developed is walking couples through each, establishing routines for each of the other intimacies, but also a very systematic, all right, we're in this season. How are we going to get out of it? Because couples feel really stymied and like, we're in the season, but we don't know how to move past it. It feels like too much to figure out how to get out of this season. And so, really walking through step by step and rediscovering this person that you're married, that, as I said before, it's not the same person that you married however many years ago, and figuring out who they are now versus who they were then, and how you can meet each other where you're at now is super important in moving out of the roommate stage.
Okay, so on one of the forms you sent me, it says there's a do not deprive verse. What does that mean?
So this one is a hot topic in Christian circles that gets me a lot of hate on my socials. Um, because people are like, you just hate sex. And I'm like, literally no. My whole platform is founded on go have good sex. But that verse, so the verse says, do not deprive each other, except for a time of prayer and fasting, as in like, and so many modern American Christians look at that through the modern American lens and say, well, that means that you can't ever say no to sex with your husband. Or they'll say, well, it means you can't say no too often to sex. And it's always used against women. Never once in all of my career heard it used against a man. um it's always used against women, saying, well, you can't deprive them, or they'll go find it elsewhere, or your husband's using pornography. Oh, how much sex have you been giving him? Were you depriving him? Okay, so we first need to establish that saying no to sex because I'm exhausted or I'm on my period or for literally any reason does not mean that my husband is being deprived of sex. That's not how that works. Now, if a woman is uninterested in sex on a consistent basis, or a man, this is like I said, this is more frequently used against women, but it can go for a man too. If someone is uninterested on a consistent basis, instead of simply saying, you're sinning if you don't have sex with me, because the Bible says, get curious. Let's go back to that. Get curious. Why are they not interested? Because, like I said, healthy women in safe marriages don't turn down good sex for no reason. So, if she's not interested, there is a reason. It's either a physical or mental, hormonal reason. Like, there's possibly sexual trauma in her past that has been unaddressed up until this point. Healthy women, okay, so that covers a lot of things in safe marriages. Is she safe to say no to sex? If she is not safe to say no, she can never truly say yes. Does he pout if he doesn't get his way? Does he say things like, well, it's been a week since we've had sex. This is a sexless marriage. Or, I've seen men online say, well, if she won't have sex with me, she's sexually abusing me. That's not how that works. That's nonsense. You're selfish. Stop it. Don't turn down good sex for no reason. Is the sex good? there's a massive orgasm gap in this country. Men are having orgasms at almost a 2-to-1 ratio than women. So if she's not orgasming every time or nearly every time, why should she want to have sex with you? What is in it for her if you're the only one getting off? Right? So going back to the original question of like, what about this verse? Also, that's the modern American interpretation. That was not the original intent or writing of the verse. So the verse comes from Corinthians, and Paul was writing to a church that was in a very secular culture. um my mouth has trouble with words sometimes. It was in a very secular culture, and the false gods that existed within the city of Corinth demanded celibacy from their worshipers. So now these people who are used to using celibacy as a form of worship are getting to know Jesus, getting saved. And then they're saying, oh, well, I should be celibate because that's how you worship a God, right? And Paul is saying, no, Jesus doesn't want your celibacy. That's not how we worship Jesus. And because these people were then getting married, and after marriage saying, oh, well, I'm not going to have sex with you because I'm celibate for Jesus. And Paul saying, legally, no, that's not how that works. Don't do that. Jesus doesn't want your celibacy. And so unless your spouse has told you, well, I'm going to be celibate for Jesus, that verse does not apply. That's you have to look at historical and cultural context of the Bible before you try to start using it against your spouse. Now, absolutely, if, like I said, if there's an issue, they're not interested, let's figure out what the issue is and address it, because couples should be having good sex. But you don't get to that point by weaponizing scripture or complaining or fighting about it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go into the big question. All right. So what if you are struggling to have an orgasm? What can help?
Oh, so many things. But the first thing that you need to do is figure out why you are struggling to have an orgasm. In fact, I just posted a video about this like yesterday. There are so many doctors who do not offer truly informed consent to their patients. They will put them on some antidepressant medication, anti-anxiety medication, birth control is one of the big offenders, and not tell them that those medications will interfere with your libido and potentially your ability to orgasm. So if you come to me and you say, I used to be able to orgasm, but now I can't, my first question is always, are you taking medication? Okay, before we do anything else, you need to go back to your doctor and you need to figure out if it's the medication that's interfering with your ability. Because I have seen so many women completely lose their ability to orgasm simply because of medication, and a medication change fixed the issue. That is like the number one offender. And another one, I know people are going to get mad at because they're tired of hearing about it. Are you dehydrated? Women need water in order to produce every single fluid in your body. Women need sufficient lubrication in order to enjoy sex and in order to orgasm. Dehydration can actually inhibit your ability to get there. So drink more water. I'm sorry, don't shoot the messenger. That's another big one. There's other things like women who have ADHD. ADHD interferes with your ability to concentrate, and you need to be able to live in the present moment in order to orgasm. And that can be a huge struggle for women with ADHD. And so, really learning how to focus during sex can be a huge help in learning to orgasm. One of the things that I talk about in my Patreon is reconnecting with your body, because as a society we teach women to disconnect from their bodies from the time that we're young. Oh, you have your first period, you're in terrible pain from cramps, pull an Elsa, conceal, don't feel, you still have to go to school, right? I worked in labor. I got up, I went to work, I sat at my desk for almost the whole work day. I left because my husband had an eye doctor appointment, but I went to work in labor. In labor. Why did I do that? because I was so disconnected from my body. I could not be sure that I was actually in labor because no one society, our mothers, our sisters, our friends all teach us, don't feel it, ignore it, like, you just have to keep going. You just had a baby, you need to bounce back. No one teaches us to live in our bodies. No one teaches us that. How do you live in your body? What does it mean? I have women tell me all the time, I'm so in my head during sex. I don't know how to get out of my head. And so learning techniques that will get you out of your head, learning mindfulness techniques that will get you more into your body on a consistent, not just during sex, on a consistent basis, paying attention to what's happening with your body, not ignoring your hunger signals, not ignoring your thirsty signals, right? Those are all stepping stones to learning to orgasm.
All right. That was a lot of information.
It's a lot. It's so
Yeah.
much.
Well, any closing thoughts?
Go have good sex.
Well, there you go.
If you have questions about what was covered, or you want to go deeper with anything, my website is thechristiansexpert.com. And I do think that you should be having good sex, and I can help you do that. I would love to help you.
All right. Well, I'm going to have all your contact information below. And at the beginning, you said, I thought, oh, this was going to be really awkward. But it wasn't at all. I mean, you put everything down so simply that I just really appreciate it.
I appreciate that. I think people think that this is a complicated subject, and it doesn't have to be. It's our own brains that make it complicated. It can be very simple when you have the right tools. And I think that's an important part of it.
All right. Well, I'll have all your information below. So, all right, Giant Builders, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This has been The Giant Builders with Lois Wyant.